All right, welcome everybody to this live call with Tabor Shadburn. My name is John. I'll be hosting and helping out with some of the questions. And this live call is entitled Survive the Holidays and Consciously Create Your New Year. So I'll just give a little introduction here of Tabor, who's in his nice purple shirt there I like. So Tabor is a dear friend of mine. He is a spiritual counselor and a guide and an incredible teacher of transformation. Many of you who are on the call know him. Some of you may not, but he has created something called revolutionary relating. And he also is the only master trainer in radical honesty. And we're always psyched to have Tabor leading these calls and giving us personal attention and all. So thank you, Tabor. And I'll pass it over to you.
My pleasure. Thank you, John, for that gracious and richly deserved introduction. Welcome all to our most recent live video call. We've been trotting these out on a somewhat regular basis now, and it's really sweet to be able to meet and talk with people from all around the globe in real time and kind of sit together in a way that transcends time and space. It's one of the miracles of modern technology. So welcome into this room that we are creating together. The topic of this talk tonight, even though they're always, it could change on a dime, but what inspired me to talk about tonight was what I was calling surviving the holidays and consciously creating the new year, because of the time of year that we are in right now, which is a rich rhythm that of our lives, and many of us have very technologically driven indoor living lives, but we can't escape the cycles of nature, and at this time of year we are metaphorically and quite literally headed into the dark. And as the nights get longer, the days get shorter, the time gets colder, it affects us on a deep level, as it has our species for a very long time. I mean, you figure in the past, it was a scary time. The light was going away, the warmth was going away, the plants were dying, there was less food. It was kind of a creepy time, which is why people huddled together indoors with lots of light and formed these rituals about honoring the darkness and bringing back the light. And it's interesting to note how there's kind of worldwide traditions and rituals associated with this, in Tibetan Buddhism rather, and I think there's a version of it in Zen as well, we have the festival of feeding the hungry ghosts, where you invite all the ghosts, which of course are associated with death and your past and your ancestors, into the room, and you lay out a feast for them. You welcome them. You give them what they need. The Day of the Dead also happens around this time of year in Latin American countries. You invite all your ancestors, the ghosts of your ancestors, and you feed them. Even though it's turned to secular, Halloween is about inviting the ghosts to come door to door and be fed. So I think there's a deep psychological wisdom associated with this. It's a natural time of year for turning inward. And as you turn inward and there's more darkness around you, for confronting your own karma. and your karma is family driven. Now, it also happens to be the time when you are huddling inside with your family, and therefore confronted with them all the more than if you're out, in the fields all day and stuff like that. It's like now we have to be with each other. So consequently, people often find the holidays to be a challenging time of year. It not only is a time of year when these karmic chickens come back to the roost, but it's also, for a lot of us, a time when we're spending a lot of time with our family, more than we would normally. And that can be challenging or stimulating, or I think it was Ram Dass who said, "Oh, you're enlightened? Go home and spend a few days with your family. Check it out." So we make jokes about the difficulty of that, and some people, get depressed during the holidays and stuff. But it's also actually a really rich time for spiritual practice, for transformational work. So also part of those spiritual traditions is retreats, going into spiritual retreat during this time, and really facing that karma, being with that karma, seeing it as a time for cleaning up unfinished business. I think we're also near the time of Yom Kippur, aren't we? It's around, I think it's sometime around now, which is Day of Atonement. So it's the same bigger issue of how will I clean up my karma. And we, at least for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere, we go deeper into the dark. And then, of course, there is this turnaround. There is this redemption time of things suddenly turning the corner and light reemerging. So all kinds of different spiritual traditions have the birth of their savior associated with the winter solstice. Even the Jesus story is built right on top of the foundation of the Egyptian savior story. Was it Osiris, who was also killed, died, and was reborn at the time of the solstice, which is actually based in turn directly on astronomy, because as you head into the winter solstice, the noonday sun gets lower and lower to the ground, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere. And then around the time of the solstice, it's observed to be at its lowest point for 3 days. And then after those 3 days, it's resurrected. It starts getting higher and higher every day at noon. So yeah, these myths, these practices are built on the foundation of the rhythms of nature. But psychologically, we also observe them as this natural turning inward in the fall, needing to embrace and heal and work with what we find there in terms of emotional unfinished business or dealing with our families. And then as the new year comes in, this sense of new possibilities and wanting to get more intentional about how we live our lives. So that's the general context within which we are setting this call. And during our Q&A time, you are therefore especially encouraged to ask any questions that you have about dealing with family or making the holidays more holy. I said in my newsletter, let's bring some holy back into the holidays. So how can you use the holidays as a time of transformation, not just mass consumption or stuffing yourself into oblivion? And of course, you're also free to ask questions about any old thing you like. And also about, the creation of the new year, although we're not quite there yet. So you are welcome.
All right. So we'll open it up for questions now, and just raise your hand if you have a question and you want to do it face to face. And then otherwise, if you don't want to do that, you can post the Q&A in the Q&A box that you'll see at the bottom of your screen. And we'll go over to, and then Manal actually has a question right now from Facebook Live. So let's go over to Facebook Live to get things started. All right, so this question is, so Tabor, this question is, why is it that when I'm with my family, I often feel so lonely? It's like I want to be with them and I miss them, but when I'm actually with them, I feel totally alone.
I wrote a song about that, actually. Have you ever been lonely with your family all around? Yes, I have had that experience. I was just posting on my Facebook the other day about this issue, some delicious quote from Carl Jung, as a matter of fact, I think, which is that loneliness is not a function of whether you have people around you or not. It's a function of whether you feel able to communicate the things that are most important to you, or whether those parts of yourself seem welcome in the company you're keeping. So oftentimes when people are around their families, they have these little ritualized ways of relating. This is what we always do at the holidays. It's kind of like rituals. One of the functions of rituals, one of the less transformational function of rituals, what we might call a compensatory or defensive function of rituals, is to protect us against the unknown. It's like, oh, I know what to do now. I know what to do in this situation. So we can look at that, the outer level, when it gets really dark outside and really cold and it's kind of spooky, I know what to do. I have these holiday rituals. And amongst family members or people who know each other well, it doesn't end there. There's ritualized ways of relating. So it's like, oh, we sit around the table and we tell these same kind of stories every time, or, Uncle John watches football with Dad while such and such happens, and there's these kind of routine, ritualized ways of behaving with each other and communicating with each other that become entrenched, and they protect people from the discomfort of not knowing what to do next. But it also can leave you feeling quite lonely, because then you're just reenacting this kind of tired husk of connection, as opposed to really noticing what's alive for me in this moment. What would I most like to share? What am I afraid that other people won't want to hear? And so we, in essence, sell ourselves down the river and then feel lonely about it. In a sense, we abandon ourselves by just falling into the well-worn groove of what we think everybody expects, and not asking for anything different, and not saying anything that might rock the boat, and the consequence of that is feeling lonely. Because a part of us knows we're letting ourselves down. A part of us knows we're settling for much less than what is possible.
Yeah, Tabor, I wanted to throw in there that I found that I have fluctuated back and forth with this lonely question from falling into deep childhood patterns that are not necessarily the patterns that I'm always enacting in my daily life. So I go home and I enact these childhood patterns. So then I feel lonely. I'm not myself. And on the flip side, when I feel like I've gained some insight or I've done some therapy and learned some things, I come back and I sort of build a kind of spiritual arrogance or like a silent resentment of everyone around. So I sort of flip flop between the two, and both of those are not actually doing what you just said.
Nice, good point. Yes, yes. Conformity is lonely, and so is superiority
Mm.
or arrogance. And the challenge is to really notice where the growing edge is. Notice what risk you could be taking. That and those kind of risks really, even if there's pain or anger involved in your relationships with your family, when you're really taking that risk, it's not, it's different than blame. No one is, you're not calling anybody out or telling anybody off. You're sharing yourself, you're revealing yourself in a way that takes courage and daring, and you're asking for what you want in a way that requires opening your heart.
So just put it out there. Anyone who wants to do a live Q&A with Tabor, just raise your hand. And Tabor, this is another follow-up question to that on Facebook Live from another person. So you talked a little bit now about having more honest conversations with family. Are the holidays the right time to have some honest conversations with my folks, or will that just muck things up? Isn't it safer to just have a holiday without shaking things up?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. There's a story about these two monks who both loved to smoke their pipes, and and they were a little concerned because they loved smoking their pipes so much. They were afraid that that reflected poorly on their spiritual practice. So one of them went to the abbot of the monastery and he said, "I got a question for you. Is it okay to smoke my pipe while I'm praying?" And the abbot says, "No, of course not. Pray with full commitment, with undivided attention." The monk looks really depressed and wanders off and tells the other monk about the meeting. And the second monk says, "Hmm." So he goes to the abbot's office and he says, "I have a question for you." And the abbot says, "Yes." He says, "Is it okay to pray while I'm smoking?" And the abbot says, "Of course, you should pray at all times." So, so the point is, perhaps a little obscure, the point is, um, yeah, in an ideal world, you make times with your parents or your extended family that are dedicated to nothing but having that kind of an honest conversation. It would be great to schedule something like that this fall before the onslaught of the holiday activities or before the more extended family shows up or whatever. Say you want a little time with them beforehand. And see what kind of clearing you can do when there isn't a lot of other complicated input. At the same time, how are you going to do your holidays? Do you want to do them in a phony, self-repressed as opposed to self-expressed sort of way? I hope not. So both and. Yes, it's great to do uh, dedicated conversations that are just about cleaning stuff up with your family, just like it's great to do silent sitting meditation. And it's great to bring as much true depth and communication to your holidays as possible, just like it's good to have mindfulness practice that extends into brushing your teeth or, you know, driving your car, whatever. Good question.
All right. Okay, so this question is from a caller here. So moving away from Facebook Live. This is from Carolyn. It says, "Hi Tabor, I'm reading Radical Honesty with my boyfriend. He denies ever feeling angry except at his mother and daughter. I express my resentments towards him regularly and I try to keep up to date, but he doesn't. How can I help him be willing to feel or express anger towards me?"
Good one. There's several layers to that question. One is the assumption that you should help him express his anger towards you, and that he wants to be helped express his anger towards you. The sad truth is, I would suggest it's your job to learn to accept him completely, regardless of the degree of anger that he does or doesn't express to you. Now, that may involve you expressing your anger toward him about the ways that he's being when you think he's angry, but he says he's not. But your job is to not try to control him with your anger or your honesty. The way that we practice honesty is like out loud meditation practice. And I don't do my meditation practice in order to get you to change. That's not the purpose of my meditation. My meditation is to help me. So you can make a request. You can, what I call, be a request with him, which is where you show up vulnerably and say, "Hey, would you be willing to try X, Y, or Z for me? Would you be willing to try expressing some anger or sharing more of your feelings with me?" But the nature of a true request is that it welcomes two answers, yes or no. So he has every right to not want to express anything if he doesn't want to. And then you have to say, how do I take care of myself in the face of him being exactly how he wants to be? And how do I come to acceptance of him as he wants to be? Or do we just want different things? And it's time to acknowledge that and, go our separate ways. That is a possibility too. Now, another dimension to the question is about hidden anger. And I would say, some people are more anger prone than others. And it's also true that very oftentimes people are angry without being consciously aware of it. That there's a kind of an anger operating on a subconscious level, which gives birth to various kinds of passive-aggressive behaviors or things like that. But we can't, if someone is more subconsciously angry, faulting them for that in some way is just going to probably drive the anger further underground. Or else we get turned on, and the only reason for the anger is that we won't let them not be angry. And so, again, the question is to be curious. Hey, do you think it's possible that you're angry on some level and not aware of it? Or do you, when I experienced this behavior from you, I thought that there might be some kind of unconscious anger behind it. Do you think that's possible? So you can start an exploration, but that person has to be interested in the idea of getting more in touch with their anger for you to be of any help to them. So otherwise, better for you to ask them if they can be of help to you. Like, would you be willing to help me out by trying to notice if there's anything that you might be feeling towards me but afraid to say?
Tabor, I want to ask a follow-up to that that's coming from another question here. This is kind of addressing that bigger question in honesty work around being mad at someone for something they're not doing. So I was wondering, in this instance, could you address that? That there are moments when we can ask, right? But a lot of time we're triggering ourselves because we want people to do stuff, and so our requests are often loaded with anger. Is there a way to kind of clear that, or a clean way to clear that, where we're not just bombarding someone with stuff they have to do to make us feel better?
Yeah, I heard several questions there. One was the thing about expression of anger about something that somebody is not doing.
Like not expressing anger in this case. Right. Yeah.
So for me, usually, if I'm getting triggered about something that someone else is not expressing, it's because of something that they are doing. And what it is that they are doing, I am interpreting as a covert expression of something, and I want a direct expression of it. So if you think that somebody is mad at you and not saying it, then the question is, what are you observing? What are you hearing? What are you seeing that you think is evidence of their anger? So for me, say somebody gets really kind of monotone or kind of chilly in their tone of voice, or, oh, well, that's, no, I'm just a little disappointed about that, and there's things that happen in terms of their choice of words, their tone of voice, their facial expression. Those things that are happening are the trigger. It's not that they're not expressing anger with you, although some people may just like a good fight, and so they want somebody that they can get to yell at them from time to time. But most of the time, it's not that you're mad that they aren't expressing anger, it's the way that they are showing up that you suspect is evidence of them being secretly angry. And to speak to another point you had, if I'm stirred up emotionally, then my first request of you wants to be, will you listen to me about how I'm feeling right now? Mm. And if you say no, well, then it's on me to go sit with myself or go walk around the block or kick the dog. No, not really. Or do whatever I do to try to take care of myself. Hopefully, if we have some kind of commitment to each other, you're either yes or, in a couple hours or at this time, can we talk and stuff. And then once I'm talking with you about my feelings, my job is to create peace inside myself, to create a greater relaxation, a greater resolution of the energy that's moving inside myself. And ideally to do that before any other requests for behavior change and stuff like that. It might be in the moment, it would like, would you be willing to, tell me what you think you heard that I just said, or you might have some simple requests about the conversation that you make before you're clear. But ideally, you want to go for kind of an orgasm of whatever feelings you're going through before you then request a larger behavior change. Like, so would you be willing to, take out the trash or not leave your dirty socks on the bedroom floor or whatever your thing is, So before you, or would you be willing to look into the possibility of expressing anger differently? But you don't do that out of your anger. In fact, this is a common loop. It's kind of a stereotypical loop. It doesn't have to be sex biased in this way, but there's a tendency that women will get angry at men for not expressing their feelings. What they don't know is that the men and the man in question might not know either that part of how he's not expressing his feelings is that he's nervous or scared or intimidated by all this emotional stuff. And then she gets mad at him for not expressing his feelings, which makes him more nervous, which makes him more kind of shut down or stonewalling, which she experiences just an insult because he's not coming forward, he's kind of retreating, and it goes around and around. So, yeah, trying to make someone else express themselves more is a losing battle.
All right. Thanks, Tabor. So we've got a question here from, let's see, I'm going to bring her on.
Hey, Kara.
Can you see her?
I can.
All right. Kara, can you say hello?
Her mic is muted.
Oh, there we go.
Hi.
Hey there.
Hey, Tabor.
So Kara's got
Can
a
I
question
ask
here.
a question?
Yeah, ask your
Yeah.
question.
That I wrote down. So I feel like I'm more comfortable once I'm already in the middle of a conversation with somebody, like a mom or dad or family member. Once we get into it, I feel like I know what I can handle myself. But getting the conversation started is really hard. And I feel myself just going into that same routine of, like you were saying, the ritualized thing that we always do. And so I'm wondering if you have some words of wisdom about just like getting over the precipice of like getting it started.
Yeah, well, it's not for the faint of heart, perhaps, but yes, I do have an idea about this. I remember once I was at my own birthday dinner, and I was at a big table full of people, and 3 or 4 conversations were going on at once, and I was bored to tears, and I realized, wait a minute, this is my birthday, supposedly in celebration of me, and I'm tolerating this conversation, and I don't want to be. So I said, excuse me, everyone, excuse me. And then once I had their attention, I said, could we have a conversation about what kind of conversation we want to have at this table? So I wasn't even saying, I want to specifically have this kind of conversation with you. I was just raising the question of like, we usually just kind of go into this automatic way of being with each other. I wonder what would be fun for us to talk about or rewarding for us to talk about. What would be rich for us to talk about? And I don't even remember what we exactly determined to settle upon, but when it was over, one person at a time was talking, going around the circle. Everyone else was listening deeply. People were moved. I was very gratified. So it's possible that even with your dear old mom or your auntie or whatever, you could say, I noticed that usually I just start a conversation with you by talking about the weather or asking how your dog is doing or whatever, because I don't know what else to say. But the truth is, I miss you, or I want to connect with you. I wonder what's most alive for you in your life, what's most important to you these days, or I'd like to tell you about something that really matters to me. And you kind of have a conversation about conversation, and ask specifically for what people most want to talk about or most want to get out of the conversation. Now, of course, some people will just look a little dumbfounded or feel uncomfortable in the face of such a direct question. And you can always, recover if that's just not, if that's falling flat, you can always go back to talking about the weather or whatever. But a lot of people will be gratified at you for having the courage to try to cut a new groove.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something you can imagine working in those situations, or that you'd be willing to try?
Yeah, definitely. Because one thing I've tried before is, you know, it comes out as criticism. Like, like, oh, this conversation is so this or that, can't we do something else? But I had the experience with an aunt of mine that I haven't seen in, I don't know, many, many years, came to town last weekend. And I kept asking her questions, trying to get her to talk. And, like you were just saying, like sort of a losing battle to like try to get someone to talk more or whatever. And I just could never get anywhere with her. And I would share stuff about me that was important to me, and I just couldn't really get anywhere. And I know that she and my mom are both kind of overwhelmed with what's going on with their parents right now. So I think they both just kind of wanted to like just check out completely. But yeah, I mean, I'd like to open that door and just like, yeah.
Well, a potentially, vulnerable and therefore trust building way to do that, rather than what you said about like, oh, this conversation is so such and such.
Mm-hmm.
Say, is to take a risk yourself, where you say, I kind of struggle about how to have a conversation that feels deeper or more intimate, because I notice that's what I really want,
Mm-hmm.
and so I sometimes go away feeling like I didn't connect as deeply as I wanted, and so I'm wondering about how I could create that with you. And yeah, some people are not going to take the bait. Some people, there's like people have varying levels of capacity for what I call emotional metabolism. If you stir up too much of their emotional life, they don't like it, they don't want it, let's go back to the weather, thank you very much. And so, you choose your engagements. If you try for a little while and it's really not going anywhere, then maybe you say, okay, that's great, talk to you later, bye, and you go over and you try talking to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
So there's also just kind of noticing what is so, and responding skillfully to what is so. But good luck with that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Kara.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, Tabor, I thought you brought up a great point there between really kind of sharing vulnerability, and how much that, I mean, I for myself, I find that I'll often get triggered with someone who I don't feel like we're going deep enough. And so I stay on the surface of being triggered, as opposed to like the real thing is how much I want to connect with that person. And they might not know that. So taking a risk of being like, I'd really like to connect with you. But then rather than just continually sort of trying to change the person to create the person I want, at a certain point, having to just let go of that in certain instances.
Yeah.
That's been a learning thing that I'm still learning now, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes the most loving thing is walking away, just acknowledging, oh, we're wanting different things in this moment, But as to that other point, I remember one time I was outside with this group of people standing by a fire, and this guy was just kind of talking my ear off, and that is like a personal hell state for me. At least when it's about things I'm not interested in. So I knew like, uh-oh, this is one of those opportunities. I can, nod and silently resent him, or I can do something transformational. And I knew that the transformational move would be scary for me. So I said something like, I feel nervous and embarrassed to even say this. And although I'm really interested in you, I'm not feeling very interested right now in what you're talking to me about. And I'm not feeling connected. And I don't want to hurt your feelings, but I wouldn't be honest with you if I didn't admit that. And much to my pleasure, he said, oh, yeah, I'm just kind of nervous, I guess. And when I'm nervous, I talk too much, And then we put arms put our arms over each other and just stared into the fire together. And neither of us was saying anything, but it was felt like an intimate moment. Other people were moving around, doing what they were doing, but he and I were just kind of arms over shoulders, staring in the fire together. And I was like, so relieved that I spoke up rather than letting myself be oppressed, feel oppressed by someone else's communication. And that's so easy to do for those of us who are like myself, what I call recovering nice guys. We don't want to upset somebody. We don't want to make waves. We don't want to rock the boat. So we just kind of like go along. But that breeds resentment and loneliness and disconnection. So it takes courage, but I say interrupt, find a way to ask for something else or offer something else. Experiment, see what's possible.
All right, Joe, this is a final call for anybody who wants to do a face-to-face with Tabor. We've got a minute or so just put your hand up. Tabor, I want to move us into the second part of what tonight was about, both surviving the holidays and conscious creating a new year. This is a question from Facebook, and this person says, oftentimes the new year is all about going out and having a party. What if I don't want to start the new year this way? How do you recommend ringing in the new year in a more thoughtful way?
Beautiful. Well, first, let me just go a little bit further out and say that part of the way that I see the connection between this fall movement of cleaning up your karma and this spring movement of the return of the light is that most people are mostly preoccupied with their complicated karma. Most people are what I call wound driven. They're dealing with their wounds and have their various coping strategies for dealing with those, and they've got their unfinished business with their family and they're struggling to cope with that. And it's just normal that that's the way that most people live and have to get by. But it's also true that if you get good at this work of cleaning up your karma inside and out, you can create more harmony and less inner conflict within yourself. And it's like the noise dies down inside. And then, like the returning of the light, you can start to hear inspiration better, as opposed to obligation or coping or anything. Inspiration, which is, like they've called it in spiritual terms, the still small voice that speaks to you. And the more you do to clean up your karma, to get rid of your emotional reactivity, your inner conflictedness, the more you start being able to live not a wound-driven life, but a purpose-driven life, an inspiration, an intuition-driven life. And John and I are going to be doing a course in the spring that will be about that movement, about the intentional creation of inspiration and purpose-driven life. and the turn of the solstice is a symbol for that time. Um, as for the direct question, it's a beautiful question. What ritual speaks to you? You know, like I know someone whose ritual is, instead of staying out late and staying up till midnight, which when you think about it is really a rather abstract, you know, how did people in the olden times know when midnight had come? They're like, oh, her ritual is instead to get up really early on New Year's Day when it's still black out, and then go someplace to watch the dawn of the first day of the new year. And you could do that for the first day of 2018. You could also do that for the first day after the solstice, which is the dawn of the first day that's longer than the last one was for that yearly cycle. So that could be sweet. Another thing could be, you know, go into meditation or prayer and start asking yourself, you know, what do I want more of in my life? What am I creating in my life? You know, some people do a meditation retreat over the solstice time or over the New Year's time. I've done different versions of all of the above, and I hear you that you want it to feel like a sacred time for you more than a party time, and I happy to hear that.
All right, Tibert, there's one other question here which I'm hesitating on asking you, and because I know we have, just to pay attention to the time, we have 8 or so minutes. So I wanted to see if you wanted to lead us out.
I'll try to
some announcements and all.
I'll try to do the laser version of that question.
All right. Well, this is from someone has been in both the NVC and the Radical Honesty communities and has a little question about that. Okay. So I've been trying to sort of switch from NVC, or nonviolent communication, to Radical Honesty, but many of Tabor's suggestions about communication are very much from the spirit of NVC. My dream was always to use NVC to be radically honest, but I let Brad sort of quash that in me with his germs on NVC and NVC people. Now I feel inspired. Thanks. So bring in something there about your kind of way of working with this honesty work.
Yeah, well, I hesitate to kind of brand the work of conscious communication at all, you know, whether you call it MVC or you call it radical honesty or whatever. It's very easy for ego to fall into a groove of sort of like, oh, this is the right way to communicate. This is how I do it. And ego wants that. Ego wants a cookbook. It wants a right and a wrong way to do it. It's always on the lookout so that it can be right and not wrong about how it's doing its communication. I see kind of recurring pitfalls that NVC people seem to fall into, or a lot of them do, and I see pitfalls that radical honesty people fall into. And that has probably more to do with the individual practitioner than the discipline, but it also, the disciplines are structured in such a way that makes certain errors perhaps more likely, you know. So with NVC, it tends to be pretty cognitive, and I think a lot of practitioners get hung up on the jargon and the formulas and lose kind of the passion in their bodies, and are kind of being so careful that it doesn't really give them that emotional orgasm that I was talking about. And sometimes the listeners feel like they're being jargoned upon, like, what? It just sounds unnatural. Similarly, with radical honesty, I sometimes tell people with folks outside the tribe to not use "I resent you for," because some folks, to some folks, that sounds like jargon. Like to me, with, you know, your mother-in-law or something, you might want to say, "I'm angry at you for this," or something, rather than "I resent you for," because it has a kind of a heavy, weird sound to it, you know. And radical honesty sometimes is prey to becoming what I call commando honesty. Most of the time, I like to suggest consensual honesty, whereas where I ask you, will you listen to me about how I'm feeling, and you have a chance to say yes or no, and I give you that chance. In some situations, you know, like somebody had a really abusive parent that's been dogging them for years and now refuses to listen to them, then I might suggest making an executive decision and doing commando honesty, where they just like show up on their porch and, you know, say what they have to say, at least for the 15 minutes until the cops come or something like that. There are situations where that is worth it, where you decide to do that. But for the most part, my vision is consensual honesty, which is not really sometimes built into radical honesty. So I make a point of trying to include that and recommend what I call radical honesty 2.0, or I teach my own workshops under the label of revolutionary relating. But the other point is that your honesty should feel like a risk to you. You know, your honesty is about self-revealing. It's not about, you know, blasting somebody because you have a right to. It's more about taking care of yourself and creating forgiveness by expressing yourself honestly. And yes, you don't want to be hamstrung by politeness or proper technique, but you gotta, you know, sometimes you're erring on the side of too much kind of blame or you know, throwing your energy at them, and other times you'll err on the side of holding yourself back. So you got to find the balance for yourself. And I see it's almost time to wrap up. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you for joining us on this call. This week, as a holiday present for you, there's 2 calls in 1 week, which will also make it easier for our European friends to join us. So on Thursday, there will be much more Europeans on the call. Thursday's call will be at 10 a.m. California time, 1 p.m. East Coast time, and 7 p.m. CET, which is Berlin time. So I anticipate a more global, cosmopolitan audience on that call. The general theme will be the same, but it'll be mostly Q&A like this anyway, so it's always new. And things are hopping over here. Come check us out at our new website, taberg.org. That's taberji.org. And Manal and John and Josh and Flo have been helping to create that in a beautiful way. And John and I are going to be doing a virtual course on leading a life of passion and purpose in early 2018. And March 3rd through 10th, is it? We're leading a 8-day retreat in the Hollywood Hills. John found us a beautiful home with a swimming pool and a hot tub up in the hills around LA, and that kind of a retreat is really life-changing in my experience. I've been a participant in many of them, and I've been a leader of many of them. And if you can get away, if you can commit the time, which, if you want it bad enough, you can, I highly recommend it. Life-changing. I'm really looking forward to doing it with John, and so glad that he instigated it.
And for your East Coast people, we decided Los Angeles just because the weather will be great. So if you're stuck in 10 feet of snow, come on out and we'll be in 75, 80-degree weather in the hot tub while Tabor's doing his magic. So
yeah, baby. Yeah, it's been shorts and t-shirts weather around here lately. So you owe it to yourself to get out of the snow. Anything else? I'm always available to you individually. Feel free to reach out to me on Facebook or write to us at support@churchofsoul.org. Or, feel free. I do individual sessions with people. I help people talk to their family, because those family conversations we're talking about are often very challenging. And so it can be a real godsend to have me facilitate a conversation between you and your mom, or you and your stepdad, or whatever, because we tend to think we need to work all that stuff out behind closed doors and not air our dirty laundry in public. But the truth is, transformation is best done as a team sport. It's best done with help of other people who aren't directly involved in the feelings and who have experience and stuff. So happy to help in that way anytime. And I'll be doing the Hawaii Tantra Festival in January that takes place on the land that I purchased over there in Hawaii. That should be awesome. You're welcome. HawaiiTantraFestival.com. And probably have another weekend workshop in the spring before heading off to Europe. In Europe this summer, we'll have another 8-day retreat and a trainer's training and stuff like that. So if I don't see you Thursday, and I don't see you before the solstice, wishing you happy, holy holidays, and may it be a time of transformation and karmic cleansing and psychic roto-rootering for you, and may we go into 2018 even more inspired than we left 2017. And huge thanks to John, Rosania, my handsome, able host, and Manal Yamut, my lovely assistant and powerful co-creator. Without them, this would not be happening. And join our mailing list at daverg.org.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. If you think anybody else would really enjoy these calls and want to talk to Tabor, give them this info and bring them on the call on Thursday. Good night.
Bye.